repression of the Iraqi people, says Lieutenant Colonel Adnan Rashid. When we joined up, we thought we'd secure our future and our children's future, but it didn't turn out like that. God willing, we'll make up for the past and correct our relationship with our people. And just to make sure they are recruiting good cops, Marines had called for only a couple of hundred to come today.
Unfortunately, somehow the word got out. There was a breach in the security someplace. The word got out, so we had a couple of thousand of them show up versus a couple of hundred.
But that's good. You want lots of people.
Well, we do. Unfortunately, you know, these things have to be done in baby steps.
A baby step like this. One Iraqi police car with a two-vehicle armed Marine escort. Desperate city residents immediately clamor for a stop to the looting. Meantime, back at the academy, an exhausted officer tells everyone to go home and report back Thursday morning. Restoring order to the city will have to wait a while longer. Christiana Manpour, CNN, Baghdad.
American soldiers man a checkpoint outside Kirkuk, trying to keep looters and gunmen out of town. An attempt to end the chaos that followed the Iraqi army's retreat. But the damage has already been done. It's too late for this school. A mob wasted it. Nermeen al-Mufti attended the Rafidain school 30 years ago. To her, the new Iraq is hardly an improvement over the old.
So if it is a freedom, it is a freedom in the taste of ashes.
Ashes and flames. Someone torched an abandoned Iraqi army personnel carrier in the middle of Kirkuk, a funeral pyre for a regime that has disappeared. Rare is the street here where something hasn't been ransacked, burned, or demolished. The ashes lie thick on the floor of Kirkuk City Hall, looted, then torched after the Iraqi army fled. All the annoying but necessary paperwork that keeps a modern city functioning, gone. Farhat Nazmi's job was to keep Kirkuk clean. He worked here for 32 years. I was devastated when I saw the office like this, he says. What can I do now? Kirkuk's courthouse has also been trashed. No appendage of Saddam's hated regime spared. Years of legal records reduced to dust. What started as regime change has, as a result of the looting and lawlessness, become regime obliteration. Gone are the tools of repression, but also gone are the courthouses, the schools, the government buildings that keep a society running. At a government warehouse, this year's cotton harvest has been burning for 3 days. What the looters couldn't take, they torched. A country's wealth, some might say its very soul, seems to be going up in flames. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Kirkuk.
And main power base was the last of Iraq's main centers of population to fall to the Americans. Today, the US Marines were in the center of it. They had met some resistance overnight, both from elements of the Republican Guard and from Arab fighters. This was the account of a reporter with NBC News.
Suddenly, automatic weapons fire rakes the area. A rocket-propelled grenade strikes an abandoned Iraqi vehicle packed with ammunition. Mortars, recoilless rifle rounds, magazines of bullets, and it begins exploding, sending sheets of flame into the darkness, rounds cooking off, flying over our position.
Some of these people we're finding are third country nationals. So it's a difficult situation, but we think we're on top of it.
The war isn't quite over, even in the capital. Last night, US Marines engaged Iraqi irregulars in the square where the statue of Saddam Hussein was toppled only last week. It's also close to the Palestine Hotel where the journalists are. If you get arrested here, it doesn't go unreported. For the first time, some Iraqi police were back on the streets, operating alongside American forces, the beginning of a return to law and order.
Obviously, we want it to be joint rather than all of us, because there's a great fear on the with the Iraqi people that we are here as an occupying force, and that's not the case at all.
Some small-scale looting has continued, with the Americans still being criticized for letting it happen.
Don't you say, I want to go and stop the guy.
Well, I just follow orders right now. There's very serious things going on that have priority. It's a very dangerous place right now.
Traffic has returned to the streets, even traffic jams. It isn't yet business as usual, but any kind of business is an improvement. Martin Bell, 5 News.
US helicopter gunships blast Iraqi positions on the outskirts of Tikrit. But this was not the battle royal that many had predicted. And tonight Saddam Hussein's hometown is firmly in American hands. Earlier we drove in from the north on a dangerous road where a little later militant Arabs fired on another group of journalists. We were lucky and got through to American positions at a half-destroyed bridge. We found US Marines already in occupation of Tikrit's main square, still dominated by an equestrian statue of the fallen dictator. We joined the Marines as they pushed forward to secure the main populated area of the city. Ahead of us, helicopter gunships swooped over the rooftops. We're with a forward group of US Marines which is advancing extremely cautiously towards what we believe is the central mosque of the city of Tikrit. The situation at the moment is calm, there's no shooting, but it is extremely tense. And it's clear that these American soldiers believe that they could come under fire at any moment. Many Tikritis had fled. Those who remained watched the American seizure of their city calmly, but with little warmth.
We support anyone who comes here, Saddam or anyone else. All we want is peace.
The Americans occupied government complexes and carefully secured the police headquarters, already half destroyed by bombing. Then suddenly the gunships went into action. American helicopters and now jets have been striking targets just beyond the outskirts of the city behind me over there. We've been told by local people that until yesterday this area was full of what they called Fedayeen, the irregular fighters who have been fighting on behalf of Saddam Hussein. And it's possible that those units have now tried to pull out northwards and are being attacked by the Americans from the air. In fact, the Iraqi fighters had withdrawn to a military base just outside the city, and it was immediately bombed by the Americans. The fight for Tikrit was effectively over. What remains are grandiose monuments to Saddam's rule. This was one of his favorite palaces, but today American armor filled his drive. Looters had already emptied the once magnificent buildings. The Americans found only empty chambers and no answer to the question of where the fallen tyrant may now be. Julian Mannion, ITV News, Tikrit.
Stepping in to the fray. US Marines holding looters at gunpoint. This is what the Iraqi people have been begging for and what the Americans were loath to do. These men must count themselves unlucky. It's the first time the Marines have got involved. But this is one isolated incident. Across the city, it's business as usual for looters. The only hurry here, a fear that gas cylinders from the factory will explode in the flames. The looting and the burning is continuing unabated across Baghdad. But it's not just government buildings. Now homes and factories, offices are being looted. Everything, it seems, is fair game. American soldiers can't stop all this. They have enough on their hands. This was the scene from our hotel balcony last night. US Marines are still coming under fire from resistance fighters. They are trying to re-establish a Baghdad police force. These men all say they were police officers under Saddam. Their first task today, to destroy his image. Next week, Marines hope to begin patrols with local police. But we met one officer today who couldn't wait that long. He told me he simply put on his uniform and went back to work, even persuading an American patrol to blow up ammunition he found. But this level of cooperation is rare, if not unique. Tonight, much of Baghdad is still lawless and ungoverned. Andrea Catherwood, ITV News, Baghdad.
Former rulers are on the run, in many cases it would seem with suitcases full of dollars. Of the pack of cards issued to American soldiers, we know the 5 of spades, one of Saddam's half-brothers, Watban Ibrahim Hassan al-Takriti, has been caught by British Special Forces. He was apparently trying to get out into Syria. It's also been reported that Izzat Ibrahim al-Duri, the northern commander, was seen leaving for Syria last week in a convoy of 24 Chevrolet four-wheel drives carrying $20 million. But as for the ace of spades himself, Saddam, with a price tag of $25 million, still no definitive news. Nor has anything been heard of his second son and designated heir Qusay, or indeed of his psychotic eldest son Uday. Saddam's wife and daughters are said to be in Syria, and those who know him best say there will have been a plan to get at least one of the sons out to protect them and the family fortune. There have been successes. The man who's said to have headed Saddam's chemical weapons program gave himself up, but most of the pack still haven't been found. The Americans in particular will now be mounting a huge effort to track these men down. In the skies close to the Syrian border, they'll be using J-Star surveillance aircraft, which have 6 different types of radar to track moving targets on the ground. They'll also almost certainly be using Predators and light aircraft, with special eavesdropping antenna fitted inside their wings. These have been used in other long and difficult manhunts all around the world. Black Hawk helicopters, supported by Apaches, will be moving special forces around, trying to seal off escape routes. They've been engaged in fierce fighting around the border town of Qa'im. Republican Guard opposition here suggests they may be staging a last stand to allow as many leaders as possible to slip over the border into Syria.
John, when we go out on the streets, we meet a lot of people who want to talk about what's happening now, people who are worried about the looting and the general breakdown of law and order. And then we meet people who can't think about today because of all the terrible things that have happened to them. We went to the Abu Ghraib prison today, and when we were there looking around, just trying to find out what's happened, we kept coming across people who had returned because they were desperate for evidence, because they had to go back. They just had to purge themselves somehow of the terrors of Saddam Hussein's recent past.
The colonel had been waiting a long time for this moment. He had spent 5 years in Abu Ghraib prison, and today he came to get his revenge. He was part of a work gang forced to build and paint the mural.
It's personal. I came to wash away the shame. I took part in building this wall. I was a political prisoner in this jail. Some people criticized me and asked, how could you have participated in building a mural to this oppressor? We were political prisoners from every part of society, Arabs, Kurds, Sunnis, Shia, Turkmen, everyone.
The cells of Abu Ghraib have been ransacked, looting and revenge. This was one of the most notorious of Saddam Hussein's prisons. The colonel said he had been part of a secret anti-Saddam organization within the military, but he wouldn't say exactly what he'd been charged with. Thousands of political detainees, as well as ordinary criminals, passed through here. Many never emerged. The records have been scattered and destroyed. But people come here every day seeking the truth about what really happened in Abu Ghraib. Karim Jali Hashem knows what happened to his 2 brothers. He wants to find those who did it.
The execution committee had my brother slaughtered with a knife. They did executions on Saturdays and Tuesdays. They would execute 10 to 15 people, or sometimes as many as 25 in a day.
He and the colonel took us to see the morgue. Karim says he was told, go and find your brothers there. They were lying in a pile of 50 stinking bodies. Their main crime appears to have been insulting Saddam Hussein's son, Uday. Outside the gallows chamber,
my big brother was hanged with a rope like this. My younger brother, they cut his throat with a knife.
the colonel was calm and determined. When we first met Karim, he was weeping. By now, he just wanted to make sure we saw everything, even the gallows, to make sure that we understood how truly terrible was this place where his brothers had been killed. Once condemned, they slept 15 to a cell, each man knowing he was going to die. Afterwards, unclaimed bodies were buried in numbered graves. Others returned to their grieving families. There's nothing left here. No evidence that will lead Karim to his brother's killers. Just the echoes of the victims of Saddam Hussein.
Southern Baghdad.
The 101st Airborne Division has been inspecting several sites where they believe elements of an Iraqi chemical and biological weapons program may have been hidden. Last week, near the central Iraqi city of Karbala, they found one such site that they say is very suspicious. A short while ago, I spoke with Brigadier General Benjamin Frakely about what they found at that site.
In Karbala, when we were fighting there with the 2nd Brigade, the 2nd Brigade found about 11 buried connexes, large metal 20 by probably 20-foot vans buried in the ground. They are dual-use chemical labs, biological and chemical. About 1,000 pounds of documentation were found in that. And they were close to an artillery ammunition plant. So this is consistent with the Iraqi denial, former Iraqi leadership denial of doing anything, any wrongdoing.
The general went on to say that the equipment inside of those laboratories, what he is describing as mobile chemical and biological laboratories that they found hidden under the ground there, is worth about $1 million and appears to have been purchased subsequent to the year 2000. Basically, he is implying that the Iraqis did not supply this information in the Iraqi declaration to the United Nations on their biological and chemical weapons program. Now, it is important to note, and we don't want to sensationalize these findings, it is important to note that this is not the first site that the 101st has inspected. There have been false alarms. A week ago, the 101st found a site where they believed they had either found nerve agent or high-grade pesticide. Today, the general told me that turned out to be high-grade pesticide. These inspections really require slow and tedious work, and they need to be treated both by the inspectors and the media as such. It is inappropriate to expect quick results, but the 101st believes that they have enough hard and interesting information, findings at this site to continue their investigation. Ryan Chilcote, CNN with the 101st Airborne in southern Baghdad.
Blocking positions with Kurdish fighters in this region right here to prevent any movement down into support Tikrit. Obviously, Tikrit was ringed with Al Adnan division and also some elements of the Nebuchadnezzar division. But as the troops moved into it, we know that there were some fierce firefights, but also what was seen was some cannibalized equipment, some equipment that had been left in disrepair underneath hangars, BMPs, some tanks, etc. So I think the larger issue here going forward is the stability of the city, and also, of course, the pockets of resistance that undoubtedly are still there. Right now, it seems that a lot of the supporters of the Saddam Hussein regime have gone underground and may have fled the area. But still, until there are more troops and until there's been a better interrelationship between the armed forces that are there and the citizens, and some of the looting dies down, then I think a better picture will develop.
3 weeks ago, they made one wrong turn, and like that, they were the first American prisoners of this war. Rounded up after an ambush that left Sergeant James Riley feeling like he was in the middle of a parking lot and everyone is shooting at you. Peter Baker of the Washington Post was with the unit that rescued them, and the former captives wanted Baker to know they did not give up without a fight.
But their guns were jammed by the sand and the dust of Iraq, and pretty soon they had nothing to fight with, and they had no choice but to surrender.
We were like Custer, said Riley.
They blindfolded them and bound them and put them in vehicles and took them away.
Taken first from Nasiriyah to a tin-roofed Baghdad prison, the 5 captives and 2 others from a downed U.S. chopper were isolated at times and terrified as American bombing runs came close enough to knock bricks off the walls of their cells.
Several of them told me that they expected to die.
Instead, they were treated by Iraqi doctors, fed 3 meals a day of chicken, rice, and tea, and assured no harm would come to them. The group was eventually moved out of Baghdad to one prison after another.
They've been moved all over 7 or 8 times over the last 3 weeks, particularly as the Americans got closer and closer to Baghdad.
Winding up in the small town of Samarra. As Chief Warrant Officer David Williams put it, we could feel that Iraq was collapsing. I could see the guards were nervous.
They didn't want to be the ones caught holding Americans.
So after their commanders fled, the guards apparently told American Special Forces where the captives were. 3 weeks of captivity ended in 2 minutes. The freed soldiers appeared dazed and exhausted, but exhilarated too.
I love you, Marines! I love you, Marines!
As the plane was landing, one of the airmen comes out and says, "Welcome to Kuwait."
I'm happy that I'm going home.
Goodbye, Iraq. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, New York.
Day when the defiant boasts of Saddam Hussein were finally buried. In the town where he was born, there was no bloody last stand. The US Marines rolled into town after dashing north from Baghdad. In the city's suburbs, we saw the results of American air attacks. Small wonder the defenders didn't wait around for a ground battle. Helicopter gunships sought out the last pockets of resistance. This is a hugely significant moment because the sight of American troops arriving here in Tikrit should convince the majority of Iraqis that Saddam Hussein and his regime have finally been destroyed. Deeper in, we found a ghost city. The regime fled, all but a few of the locals hiding at home.
They need some extra bodies.
We followed US Special Forces and Marines conducting room-to-room searches. They feared guerrilla attacks and suicide bombers. But it was the imagery of muscular American power that dominated the day. This on the roof of Saddam's most lavish palace. A monument to vanity and grand dreams, now being looted by the poor. We came to see if there was anything here we could take home, this man said. This was where Saddam Hussein felt most secure. Now those who lived in fear of him at last feel free to speak their mind.
Really, I am happy. I am happy.
Really?
Really.
Are you just saying that because they're here?
No. We live in big prison.
As the day wore on, the Marines in the centre of the city relaxed. Some posed for photographs and mocked the fallen dictator. Tell us what you feel being here in Tikrit.
I'm glad it's almost over. I'm ready to go home, see my wife and kids. I've been here too long.
But tonight, the Marines arrested these men, armed with guns and grenades. Explosions lit the sky beyond. Saddam is finished, but a small few of his supporters are fighting to the bitter end. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Tikrit.
Welcome to the underground world of Saddam Hussein's regime. Today, American Marines discovered part of the network of tunnels and bunkers that run beneath Baghdad. They were searching for members of Saddam's Fedayeen militia who are still on the run. And maybe if the Marines got lucky, Saddam Hussein himself might turn up down here, or even his alleged weapons of mass destruction.
I don't know why it's all hidden down here, though.
This search may have proved fruitless, but the Americans say they'll keep on looking.
Last man out!
Above ground, post-war Baghdad is fast becoming a tale of two cities. In parts of the capital, everyday life has resumed. Shops reopened, people back on the streets. But other parts are still consumed by dangerous chaos, where armed vigilantes continue to impose their own brutal brand of authority, opening fire on the vehicles of passing looters. But the looters seem undeterred. Here we found them siphoning petrol from a tanker. It's certainly true there is less looting now than there has been, but on the other hand you wouldn't exactly call this law and order. And the Americans know they've got a very long way to go before they can say they've got Baghdad back to normality. Today, some Iraqi police officers returned to the beat. They're working alongside American troops. But there are only a few hundred of them so far.